Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Integrative You. We have Dr. Nick here, and he's going to really be taking the lead on this one because he's very passionate about this topic. But I'm going to just kind of give you an idea of what we're talking about and actually why it came about, because a lot of these topics either come from deep conversations that Dr. Nick and I are having privately, or it comes from working with our clients. And this one specifically came out of a value session that I was doing with one of our clients. And, we were deep in the conversation. And I said, I want to ask you a question and I really want you to pause and think about it before you answer. And she is running a nonprofit. So she essentially, has her own business. And she was talking a little bit about some of the situations that she feels like she gets in with some of her clients and conversations that unfold, the good parts, the parts that stress her out, etc. And I asked her, do you feel like your past health experience, essentially an aspect of your suffering and your sickness, makes you relatable to your clients? Because essentially what she was telling me is that, she ends up talking to individuals that are struggling with certain health ailments, and she is able to connect with them in a very deep capacity because she knows what it's like to be in their shoes. And she is able to then, mentor them in order to try to get past it. And this was something, as we were talking about it, I could relate to very much. And I asked her this question primarily because we get to a place where we are we've we've leveraged what we know, we've leveraged our experiences, the good and the bad, and we've allowed it to create something for ourselves. Let's call it a certain level of success. And then we start to feel a little imbalanced. Start to feel like, is this it? Like, is this really what I want? And we don't really know how to interpret what we're feeling. We're just calling it a feeling and we think, oh, it'll just pass, but it doesn't pass. And so essentially, she leveraged her health adversities to create this business, to create clientele, to connect with certain people, to build a certain level of success. And then she started to feel like everyone was coming to her. It was an unfair exchange. And there was a lot of victim doom and gloom conversations that were honestly starting to affect her in her personal life because it was very draining. And again, I related very much. And I said, has it really occurred to you that potentially your previous health adversity is been making you relatable? And she kind of like paused and had a holy shit moment. And I'm like, now you have to ask yourself the question of, is that what I want to continue to happen? Or do I want to actually be looked at as the victor, not the victim of my circumstance, but the victor to my old health adversities? And now I help you go from victim to victor.
I don't know where to start right now.
Well, I think that we can. What I would love to hear your thoughts on this, because and some people might get triggered by this idea because no one wants to think of themselves as a victim, but we have to be honest with ourselves when we're frustrated, we're overwhelmed, we're not, happy in the moment. And we all kind of do it. We feel like this is happening to me, et cetera, which is a victim mentality. And that's not to
Yeah.
get down on yourself about it. And we tend to attract more of these conversations with other people that are also in a victim mentality.
Like
But
attracts like.
exactly. And, you know, I got to a certain point in my career that I was so fucking drained from that. And I didn't know how to process it. I didn't know what to do. And I realized it took a while and it took your help, but I realized that it's not that I wanted nothing to do with the victim mentality. I wanted the person that was maybe like, I feel like a victim to my situation right now. I don't understand it. I don't have the data. I don't know what's wrong with me. But at the end of the day, the deeper want, the deeper desire was to be the victor, to overcome it. And once I had that knowledge, I was able to be very specific in who I could work with successfully and who it was not going to be a successful exchange because they were leveraging their victim situation. And I think that's what you need to talk about is when you leverage your circumstances
Yep.
because you
So
can.
I want to start out with one thing that's highly important that a lot of people don't talk about is it's first acknowledging that you're you're holding on to these things because it's benefiting you. And you get to the point where, is this it? Hence, now it's not benefiting you as much. But initially, that, back to the story you talked about is being relatable, having the connection. Well, if I don't have this sickness, then I'm not going to have that connection. I'm not going to be as relatable. So it was a tool, and it was a great tool, and it served you and it served other people. And it's being able to whatever the pain point is, whatever the suffering is, it's to acknowledge that it was good. It wasn't just all bad. There was good to it and that you used it. And that takes you up to a certain degree of suffering. And what's interesting is, you know, our voids create our values, but a lot of our pain points and our suffering, our biggest suffering creates what we're most passionate about. But when you really study, hence one of our previous podcasts, we talked about you want to have a coach, you want to have a mentor that has more awareness than you. Suffering is the root of passion.
Mm-hmm.
So what you're passionate about, your passion is created from your suffering. We don't want to live and work and be in a state of passion because that has, like as you mentioned, that has the ball and chain, the shackles holding you back to your suffering. We want to overcome our suffering. We want to step above being passion and into being inspired. And when we're inspired, we're grounded in self-love, and we can't give something we don't have. So you have to learn how to overcome your passions. You have to overcome your suffering, and then that's when healing really occurs. Is when you're grateful for those things in the past, and hence you can use those now, leverage that information, have more awareness to make better decisions to serve you. And a lot of those, in this case, health adversities, we judge that for happening, but you look at energy, and energies, for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So we want the pleasures of life without the pain, but it's actually the pain that creates the pleasure. So we have to go through these painful points, whether it's a health issue, whether it's a mental issue, it could be a divorce, could be bankruptcy, it could be whatever it is, a loss. We have to go through those pain points, and that initially creates suffering, but then it's our job through increased awareness to go back and balance out the good and the bad within those pain points. When we do that, there's no more suffering. Suffering is literally just a creation from an imbalanced perspective. So once you can go back and balance out the perspective out, there's no more suffering. You have a greater level of consciousness and awareness, to be able to use that initial circumstance to leverage that into what? Serving what's most important to you. And that's when life gets really joyful and fun.
Well, based on what you just said, I think initially sometimes it's really hard for people to understand the how suffering can serve them. And I think that the phrase that helped me a lot in that understanding was the idea of like rejection to redirection. And their rejection, I think across the board, if you talk about rejection, and that could be rejection from a job, rejection from a partner, rejection from a friend, rejection from family, most people are going to unanimously say rejection sucks, rejection is painful, rejection is suffering. And really, when you look at rejection, it's a redirection. And so you're getting redirected no matter what. And if you could surrender and lean into that redirection because there's a higher source that's telling you exactly what you need, or showcasing the way, or you can fight it tooth and nail and potentially perpetuate your suffering. And so I love the that phrase because when something still to this day, it feels like a rejection, I'm always like, where am I being redirected? I'm going to surrender to something guiding me to something better.
Yeah, and when you think about like failures, quote unquote, rejections, it's those things happen because we think that's what was going to best serve us, but
Yep.
we have blinders on. We're like the horses going through, and we can't see all these other possibilities that are actually better for us. So, rejection hurts, but it's actually occurring because we could have gone down that pathway, but it would have wasted a lot of time, energy, money, resources, etc. And at the end of the day, we would have had a bigger pain point from creating a bigger snowball, putting all that time and energy into it, and then having to redirect after that. So, the redirection, I always look at it as like, if a door is closing, well, in that exact same moment, there's an equal and opposite. So there's a door opening. And if the door shut, it was because that wasn't the right door for you to be in that moment. And we tend as a society focus, because we feel it, and our awareness, our consciousness tends to go towards what we feel. So it takes a little bit of time and practice, but once you can actually um, strengthen the mind to be able to step out of the pain, to disconnect from that, and then search for that open door, that's when the magic really happens because that's when you're actually able to receive. It's kind of like the story that, you know, you're always knocking on God's door, but he's not opening. Well, it's like you could be knocking on the wrong door, man. So so
This is
step back and
it makes me think of I thought of myself first, but people that want to control, the idea of control, and people that call themselves control freaks, or they're always trying to control outcomes. Like what you just said is so significant to the downsides of control, because most people that are trying to control everything in their house and their family and their business and their lives, one, they're so fucking anxious.
well,
They're the
that's just
most stressed
that's living
out
in your
anxious.
lower ego.
Well,
And
yes,
ego doesn't want to die. So
but I tried to control so many things, and as you said before, is you have the blinders on, you're trying to control, thinking this is the exact way this should go, this is the best route, but you can't see what you can't see, and it creates pain, it creates suffering, it creates a lot of wasted fucking time, wasted energy, wasted resources, money. And that was the story of my life for so many years, and especially when it comes to like the pain of time, energy, and money loss when you're running a business, when you're running a big business and you're trying to control everything, and it's like do this and do this, do this, and it's like the whack-a-mole game, you can sit back and be like, holy crap, I feel like I have been grinding, working, expending so much of my energy and time, and I feel like the hamster on the wheel, and I've actually lost a shit ton of money in the process. Like, ooh, this sucks.
That's perfect because that literally just goes back to what we were just talking about is, going back to these struggles, these pain points. And initially, if we had the time, we could go back and see you taking control over things and not having other people control them benefited you. But then you relied and you held on that control too much. And that led into actually not control, that developed into an attachment issue.
Mhm.
And you had an attachment to how things needed to be done to be able to get the results that you wanted to achieve. But when you really realize that every single person is unique and has their own zone of genius, that somebody else could, if you let go of some of that control so that it was actually in a state of balance, and then you allowed that person to use their zone of genius, they could probably receive and achieve those results even quicker than you. But the journey to that would be uncomfortable because you had an attachment to how that was supposed to look instead of just having quote unquote the faith that it was going to get done the way eventually it needed to be achieved.
This is why frontline employees in big companies, they think that, the CEOs just have it made, and, they're just, because they like a really, really good CEO that is not trying to control, that is actually leveraging a lot of the things that we're talking about here, you know, they look so chill, calm, and collected on the surface because they're trusting the process, but
Well,
they're
they also
also,
hire A-team players. I
well,
mean,
yes, of course, it's multifaceted, but they're just constantly thinking and reflecting and trusting, where they're being redirected, opposed to the that's not supposed to happen this way, control, control, control. So it's a very interesting thing about this idea that I want to go back to from what you were just saying is suffering creating your passion, and then passion, because it's rooted in the suffering, essentially results in a plateau, and then it's a really an invitation to inspiration. And I want to just kind of like break this down for people to really, really absorb it, because this is so significant and so important, especially if you are a person that is committed to your own personal growth. You're committed to even better for your life, for your business, for your family. And one, I want you to know that it's okay to hit that plateau. It's just an invitation in order to surpass it. And and don't sit there and go into that analytical mind and say, but on paper my life is good, and so like I should be happier. If you don't feel fully aligned, or something feels off, even if you can't fully articulate what that is, that's the invitation to to go more into inspiration in your life. Because exactly what you said, Dr. Nick, is, you know, there are a lot of things that we experience as children, in our developmental years that creates a certain level of pain, a certain level of adversity. And a lot of us can use that. Like, I know that I used it. And it's one of the reasons why I became an entrepreneur. It's one of the reasons why I had no fear of failure, because having the same life that I observed around me, poverty stricken victim life, that was way fucking scarier than making risky business moves. So I was like, I used it. I used it, and then you obviously saw it firsthand, is on paper, had the office, had the business, had XYZ, that people could say, life looks good for Nicole. And then internally, it was like, something is off. Something doesn't feel right. I'm being called for more. I don't know what it is. I don't know what this means. And it was the it was the feedback mechanism to say, you exhausted this. You exhausted this. You had your suffering, you turned it into passion, you turned it into a mission, and now you have an invitation to take your life up a notch and to now live a life that's more rooted in your values, that's more inspiring. And you could tell me if you agree, but the way that I think about this is when you stop making decisions out of desperation, the have tos, the need tos, or shoulds, and you start to make decisions out of inspiration.
100%, honestly. I'll just explain it in a slightly different way is that the because your passion is coming from your past pain points and suffering. If you're constantly making decisions and actions that are connected with that, well, you're tied back to that. You're always going to be held back because that's your foundation. But intuition and inspiration, that's all connected with the Greek um, word telos. Just in your DNA, you have telomeres, which is the endpoint on your DNA, which has your genetic age, not your biological age, but your genetic age. So somebody could be, 50 years old but have a genetic age of 30, and somebody could be 50 years old and have a genetic age of 70. So it's the endpoint, but that's what telos is with the end in mind. So when you look at being inspired, you're looking at the end of your life, the legacy you want to live. And that's a completely different connection than your connection with your passion,
You're suffering.
your suffering.
Yeah. No, it's and for someone who's looking for the practical application of this, and I know that if you are an avid listener here, you've heard me say this in different ways on different podcasts, but when we are still rooted in leveraging our past pain, our past adversity, our past suffering, and we tend to make more decisions out of desperation. And so, what does this really look like? It's when you have an intuitive feeling to say, I'm not sure. I'm not sure about this person. I'm not sure about this job. I'm not sure about this business move. I'm not sure. Just something doesn't sync 100%. It doesn't feel exciting or inspiring. And so then now you go to the drawing board of your pros and cons list, and you look at everything, you go into your analytical mind of like, well, okay, like let's use a romantic partner as an example. It's okay, well, he's nice, I like his family, we live close by, um he's got a good job, this and that. And then on the flip side, intuitively you're like, I don't fucking like this dude. But because the pros list logically makes more sense, I'll give him a chance. And some people, based off of, their personality, some people will go and spend time and say, all right, no, I should have never done this, and move on. Some people will marry the guy, and they will have a life of pain because they keep going back saying, well, technically I should be happy because we have the nice house and the nice car and he's got a good job and he's nice. And so the goal is that you have the ability, you have the tools, you have the knowledge of who you are at your core. You know who your character is, you know what your values are. You know more about yourself so that you can make decisions that are out of inspiration. And inspiration is not just about a pros list or a pros and cons list. Like, this is about your energy. This is about how you feel intuitively. Like it's syncing all of the pieces together for you to make decisions that are just truly aligned with what's going to best serve you and the outcomes you're looking for.
I think an easy way to maybe see it, slightly polarized, but you know, inspiration isn't always going to make sense. You
Yeah,
just wrote the
that's a
pros
good
and
way to
cons.
put it.
You just wrote the pros and cons and like, well, this makes sense. I should do this. But
Mhm.
that's not who you are. We're all unique. If you look at somebody that everybody knows that's basing pretty much every decision of his life on through inspiration is Elon Musk. You know, I'm going to make a car company. Well, go take it back to PayPal. Like I'm going to create a payment structure that's not associated with a bank. That's that doesn't make sense. Like banks do that. I'm going to make a car company that doesn't use petroleum. That doesn't make sense. Every other car company is using petroleum. I'm going to create SpaceX. Like we have NASA for that. Why the fuck are you creating a space company? But it wasn't about a space company. It was about telecommunications and connecting the world and all these things. Nothing made any sense on paper, but he was inspired and he was being authentic to himself. And when you do that, guess what? The universe provides for you. The
Yeah.
door is open.
But he
But
was
if
also solving problems that were bigger than most people could see. And so, that's kind of a different topic for a different podcast. But, I think that what you said is so significant. Yeah, it doesn't always make sense. And sometimes it's hard for people to trust that.
so, trust yourself, even if it doesn't make sense. If it resonates, feels like love, you're inspired with it. If you feel that in your heart, not your gut, your heart's where you feel inspiration, your instincts, your impulses is in your gut. So connect with yourself, gain that awareness, and then if it doesn't make sense, still trust it.
And for my logical people, they're like, what does that mean? Values course. We have a online values course. You can go and actually do the work, determine your values, and that is the compass. That is the compass to lead a life that you're able to make decisions out of inspiration and not desperation. So there is a logical, logistical component to this is, if you feel very disconnected with yourself and you're like, I don't even know what inspires me. I don't know how to make decisions that are aligned. That's okay. We've all been there at certain points. And for me, because I'm very analytically and logically minded, it was the values helped me understand more about myself so that I could start making decisions out of inspiration and stop making decisions out of desperation, which essentially always blew up in my face. All right, guys, we will make sure to put the link below so that you can access the values course and get started on starting to understand more about who you are and make more decisions out of inspiration.